What is going on, boys? Little late night stream here after Thursday night football. And boy, am I glad I waited, didn't do the stream during the game. I had a near takedown just now, finished a quarter of a point off of first place, little 22x here on a Thursday night football action. So that was pretty sweet. But we're here to talk about golf for Friday, going to go through everything you need to know for Friday's Showdown slate, including the weather, ownership, talk through some of my favorite targets here for Friday's round, and any of your live questions. So we'll have some fun with it. Of course, I just made 22x my money, so I'm trying to celebrate a little bit. Wasn't drinking beforehand, but hey, anytime you have a pretty decent size win in DFS, got to celebrate a little bit. So we poured a little bit of whiskey in the cup over here. I didn't have a whiskey glass available and was already late to the stream, so I did put it in a Chick-fil-A cup. So excuse that there. It's a little bit ratchet, but hey, I'd rather get here in time to do the stream for y'all. So let's go ahead and share the screen, get this thing rocking for tomorrow. And as we typically do here, I'm going to start with a look at yesterday's conditions, or I should say today's conditions, right? What we saw on Thursday, so we can get an idea of maybe what to expect for Friday's round, which in round one, it played a lot more difficult than I think at least I expected. A lot of people in the industry most likely expected, and it was all due to the weather. We knew that the winds were going to be a factor on Thursday. We just didn't know how big of a factor, and we got our answer to that early and often. The scoring average right around 8 a.m. was a shot. Actually, it was like 2 shots over par for a little bit. It was right around 1.5 shots for a while, and by the end of the morning wave, it was only 0.4 shots over, so progressively rectified itself, got a little bit closer to even par throughout the day, and then in the afternoon actually played under par. So typically, we see the morning wave play a little bit easier than the afternoon. Today was actually the exact opposite. The morning was a little bit more difficult. And to give you an idea of why, let's take a look at Thursday's weather. So in the morning, it was 50 degrees up until right around 10 a.m. So when I said the course was playing right around a stroke and a half, 2 strokes over par, that was when it was 50 degrees in the morning. The ball doesn't travel nearly as far when you're dealing with cooler conditions. It was a little bit humid too, so the air was a little bit thick. All of that made a golf course that's already 7,400 yards play even longer. And you were dealing with 20 to 30 mile an hour wind gusts. In fact, the measured gusts they have on here of like 22 to 23 mile an hour are probably a little bit conservative based on what we saw on the telecast. So throughout the day, as the temperatures rose, you could see it got into the 60s and then right around 70 to 72 during the PM wave. That surely had a factor on play. And then the wind gusts also were a little bit more tame throughout the afternoon. So when we look at tomorrow's forecast, you can see it's also going to be relatively cool in the morning. The one major difference is that there's not nearly as high a wind gust, right? They're not in the mid 20s, near 30 mile an hour. It's in the single digits in terms of their sustained winds. The wind gusts are just 14, 15 miles an hour. So I would expect the morning wave to play pretty comparable to what we saw in the PM today. So maybe close to 0.3, 0.5 shots under par. And then in the afternoon, as the conditions don't get all that much worse, I'll say right around noon, they do spike a little bit. The wind gusts get closer to like 20 to 25 miles an hour, but that'll be counteracted by the fact that it's warmer that time of day. So I'd expect it to play right around a half a stroke under par for pretty much the entire day. So if you're looking for a weather edge, I don't think there's going to be a massive one. If you're going to try and target anyone, I guess it would be the PM guys. I mean, based on what we saw on day one, right, the PM guys had the advantage. Again, if I had to speculate, that is probably due to the temperature change that we saw throughout the day. It definitely coincides with it. The scores coincided with the weather that we saw in terms of the temperature. And with a similar sort of situation going on here on Friday, especially because it goes up to 75 in the afternoon, it's actually a little bit warmer than when it was here for Thursday afternoon, might have even more of an effect. We'll go over to the Draftkings side now, go through the player pool. And what we're going to do here is we'll talk about a few picks, right? We'll go through a few of my favorite targets. But more than anything, I want to talk about some of the strategy involved, because when you're talking about round 2 Showdown, there's a huge overreaction based on what we saw in round 1. So if you're new here, you don't play much Showdown when it comes to golf. The name of the game is all about leverage, right? Golf is a volatile sport. We choose to play most of our exposure, and I say we, just talking for most of the community out there, choose to play a lot of our exposure for 4-round contests. The whole premise there is that over a 4-round sample size, our picks are a little bit more likely to be due to actual skill rather than luck, right? Because if you've ever played golf before, let alone if you've ever watched or bet on golf before, you know how volatile the sport can be. It's a fickle at best. We know it can be crazy at times out there. And when we're going out there and playing Showdown, so for just a single round, right, 18 holes, projections, you could pretty much throw them out the door, right? You're not really going to be able to project how somebody plays round to round. Sure, people will get into, let's say, I don't even know, a trance-like state. I mean, they'll get into a little bit of a momentum patch where they go out there and they're able to ride that sort of wave, but you're not able to predict that. And a lot of times they come crashing down. So just to give you an example, right? Davis Riley shot 6 under par today. Same thing with Thomas Dietrich and Christian Bezainhout. Both of them had excellent rounds, shot 5 under par. Because of that, a lot of the public out there are going to treat them like they're going to go out there and do the same thing, right? They box score watching, they're looking at how players played in day one, and their thought process is that if somebody played well in round one, they have to play well in round two, right? And now, not the entire field is thinking that way. That's more of an archaic way of playing DFS. About a year and a half, 2 years ago, that would have certainly been the case. A vast majority of the field does have that kind of mindset. People are getting a little bit sharper, right? So not everyone is playing with that sort of mindset, but there's a large enough portion of people out there that it has a huge effect on ownership. So guys like a Davis Riley, Thomas Dietrich, Christian Bezainhout, to give you a few more examples, Sepp Straka, Mark Hubbard, for example, Adam Svensson, S.H. Kim down there at $7,500. The guys that had a really solid round on Thursday are going to get at least a 5 to 10% bump in terms of their ownership. Whereas a player that maybe wasn't so sharp, like a JT Poston, let's give an example. I guess you can include Taylor Montgomery there. Let's go down, find Rio, Hadman. You could even lump in Taylor Moore into that sort of argument. The guys that didn't shoot something like -2, -3 or better are all going to be significantly lower owned than they were for 4-round contests. So a way that I do my ownership, I don't want to give away the whole process, right? Because it's something that I sell and make a lot of money off of doing that, is I look at the ownership that I projected for. I look at the ownership for a 4-round contest. Those give me a really good baseline of where to expect players to be owned, or at least with the public sentiment on them, right? And then I look at their score. If they scored better than the average for that day, they're going to get a bump in terms of ownership. If they scored worse than that, they're going to get bumped down. And when I run that algorithm, that is like half of the algorithm that I run. Like literally that determines like half the ownership that somebody's going to see. Price has a lot to do with it too. The guys at the top of the board just get more ownership because people want to spend all of their salary. So that's definitely a part of the algorithm. So their actual price, that'll fluctuate from round to round too. Obviously their 4-round contest priced sometimes is higher or lower than what it is for their Showdown. So that has an impact on their ownership. But all that I'm trying to say here, right, in summary, is that the guys that shot well on day one are inherently worse plays than the guys that shot poorly on day one, even if we think that they're going to carry that momentum, right? Even if we account for momentum and boost the players' projections that played well on day one, it's not a big enough boost to account for the price increase, to account for the fact that they're twice, sometimes 3 or 4 times as owned as some of their counterparts around them. So if you're new here, we want to be a little bit, I don't want to say like off the beaten path here. I don't want to say that we're going to be wacky here, but we want to be smart about the pieces of chalk that we're taking. So to give you an idea of a piece of good chalk, a piece that's going to be high on that I think you should play, that would be a Sam Burns, right? So Sam Burns was super high owned going into the week. He shot -2 today, which was certainly better than average. So the sentiment on him isn't going to be super negative, but for him to be in the top 25, I think people were expecting a little bit more. So I don't think he's going to be like 40 to 50% owned, right? I think he's going to be right around where he was for his 4-round contest, which was right around like 34, 35%, depending on what contest you were in. And I liked him going into the week at that sort of ownership level. And I'm going to like him once again. Now he's going off in the morning wave, which does have lower winds. And if there's anybody that can take home a golf course that's playing a little bit longer, it's Sam Burns. That's a bomber off the tee, right? If the ball is not going to travel as far because of the fact that it's only 55 to 60 degrees, Sam Burns is going to be okay in that sort of environment. In fact, with the receptive greens and the fact that he's such a precise iron player, may actually give him a little bit of an advantage, right? Because he'll be able to stop the ball a little bit quicker. So Sam Burns, I love him out of the morning wave. He's one of the few pieces of chalk that I see myself eating here, but a more classical play that I'm getting to, right? So he's kind of the odd man out, right? He's that one high owned guy that I see myself getting to tomorrow. A lot of the plays that I'm taking in bulk. So I'm playing 35 players here for round two. I've already made my lineups. I did them during Thursday Night Football. So I have a very good idea of my exposure at this point. If you have any questions about my exposure, feel free to go ahead and comment them down below. But Russell Henley at $9,500 is a classical play I'm getting to, right? Relatively low owned, right? So 16.7%. That's actually right around where he was for his 4-round contest. He shot +2 today. He's going off in the morning. He's way cheaper than what we had for 4-round contests. So despite being cheaper and a better value now, he's right around the same ownership. So if I liked him going into the week, you sure as heck gotta like Russell Henley tomorrow, particularly because he is a spike putter, a little bit volatile in that category. Typically gains on the Bermuda surface, and today was kind of all over the place, particularly with the short game. Led a few strokes to the field around the green, which is something that can be extremely random from round to round. So if he cleans that up, maybe makes a few more putts than he did there in day one, that really just those two things alone could be enough to take him into an optimal lineup. So I like him there at 9,500. A few other low owned plays. I think that Montgomery, after his day one performance and the fact that he's more expensive now, is probably going to drive down his ownership. So he's going to be low owned going off in the morning wave. I still like the PM guys. Like I said, if we're going to target a wave, it probably is the PM guys. So if we're going to take anybody from that wave, I mean, guys like a Keegan Bradley, a Denny McCarthy are more than adequate plays. The one that I really like getting to, though, might be Scott Stallings. And now he's going to be a little bit chalky because he did play solid today, right? Shot -3. He's going to get a lot of credit from people in that department. But the one thing to consider is that he's a volatile player. He makes birdies in bunches. He's somebody who's also not very long off the tee. So if he was in the morning wave, I might be a little bit worried about it. I am kind of worried about Russell Henley. I have to admit that with him, right? He's not the longest player off the tee. I'd probably be worried about Denny McCarthy too if he was in the morning wave, but he's in the PM wave, right? So that gives him that advantage. Keegan Bradley, he probably would have been okay in the morning too because he's relatively long, but he doesn't have to worry about that, right? So these guys here at the bottom of the 9K range, I think that they make plenty of sense. But one thing to keep in mind here is that Scott Stallings and Keegan Bradley are still going to get a fair amount of ownership, right? So you're not talking about pure pivot plays here. If you're looking for somebody to be a low-owned gem, right, just single digit, maybe close to like 10% at the very most, that's kind of like your Denny McCarthy there, your JT Poston, that's going to be super low-owned. And I conveniently skipped over Sahith Theegala at the top because he's the guy I'm most worried about. Now, I'm not going to be playing him for tomorrow, just for full disclosure purposes, but he looked off today, right? His feel was off. He was missing almost every tee shot to the right. His iron play wasn't particularly strong either. And he had a few of those 7 to 10 foot putts that he's normally nails at, right? Doesn't miss from that range very often, was missing all day. So for Sahith Theegala, I'm a little bit worried about his form, but like I said, I kind of wanted to avoid talking about him because I worry about it. He can turn it around. We've seen it time and time again. He's not going to be super low owned. He's still getting a significant amount of ownership when it comes to this round, but he is lower owned than Sam Burns. So if you can't, get yourself to play a 35% owned Sam Burns, I know a lot of people going into the week that were in that department, which I understand. It's still the jury's out on that one, right? To see if that'll be an optimal play or not. You might want to do the same thing with Sahith Theegala if you're that sort of player, right? So I wanted to mention that he's still in play, but for me, I do prefer Sam Burns up top, just like I preferred him going into the week. And it's not like Sam Burns is, playing his ass off to this point. But of all the guys that are really expensive in the field, he is playing the best to this point, right? He's playing better than Sahith, Montgomery, Poston, Henley. I mean, all the guys up here until you get into the bottom of the 9K range. So I feel pretty decent about my 60% Sam Burns as of right now. But I guess we'll have to see how it goes going forward. He's far from there. He's got to finish in the top 10, top 5, right? So his 25th place finish at this point, as much as he's the best player up top here, the optimal right now is like all 9K guys. It's like Davis Riley. Obviously, it has Christian Bazane who in it too. Probably Thomas Dietrich, and then a few of these 8K guys like a Sepp Straka who was like $8,700. It's a strange optimal at this point. It's not going to hold. I can just tell you right now, that's not going to be the optimal by the end of the week. But hey, as of right now, it's the optimal lineup. I got to give credit where it's due. Let's move on to the bottom of the 9K, top of the 8K range now. Davis Riley is going to be mega chalk after his first round leader performance, which I got a piece of. I have an outright bet on him, so I hope he continues it, but I cannot play him here for Showdown tomorrow. He's going to be super high owned. If you're going to invest into him, just do me a favor and play double the field, right? So I'm considering playing him. I think that he's somebody that you might want to eat his chalk, but if I'm eating Sam Burns chalk, I'm going to have a really hard time getting to him. So at this point, I'm kind of 50-50 on Davis Riley. I'm leaning towards not playing him. The last run of lineups that I went with right before lock here about 30 minutes ago didn't have Davis Riley in it. I chose to go with some of the lower owned options like a Scott Stallings, for example, Keegan Bradley, that are going to be a little bit more overlooked because I was able to take 3 or 4 guys as a result of not taking Davis Riley. Because Davis Riley, not to give away all of the ownership numbers here, which again, they're on my Patreon page if you're looking for access to them, like the little sign here says, but he's 25% owned plus. He's way up there in terms of ownership. Obviously, not quite up there as somebody like a Sam Burns at 35%, but compared to the guys around him, he's a solid 5-10% higher owned than everybody else. I mean, even guys like a Thomas Dietrich and Christian Bezainhout look like pivots compared to somebody like a Davis Riley. So as much as I like Davis, I hope that he has a great week because of my outright bet. I'm not sure if I can play him in Showdown or justify the ownership there, especially from the game theory perspective. Let's see what's going on down in chat. We've got Sack down there. He says, hey, Luke, when you get a chance, can you look over the underdog PGA rivals and let you know if you see any good picks? Yes, I will. Remind me after I do my prize pick segment at the end of the video, and I will for sure go through that. So, yeah, just let me know, Sack. We'll definitely get to that. It's not Coke, by the way. This is whiskey in here. Anybody that's getting in here, I didn't have a glass ready, so I just fired it away in the first cup that I could find, which happened to be an old Chick-fil-A cup. It's moved into this 8K range. So Dietrich, after his great round, he's going to be a little bit higher owned than he should be, but believe it or not, he's not as chalky as somebody as like a Davis Riley, which is a little bit surprising, but he's still getting a fair amount of ownership. In terms of the actual 8K options, one that I really like getting to here is Taylor Moore at $8,600. Right around the same price he was going into the week. He's in the PM wave, which tomorrow might actually be the advantageous wave. And on top of that, today putted the absolute lights out. Now, on Bermuda grass, he doesn't have a large sample size. He hasn't been the best for his PGA Tour career. So going into the week, I was a little bit worried about that stat. And today, I kind of was able to put that aside. He made plenty of those 15 to 20 footers. He did miss a 7-footer early on, which did kind of trigger me. I believe it was on hole like number 5 today. I was like, oh, damn, I shouldn't have played this guy. I should have known better because of the Bermuda stats. But the ball striking was there off the tee. He kept it on the ballpark. That's kind of the key for Taylor Moore. And then go out there, make putts like he's used to doing week in and week out. I mean, look at this. Over his last 24 measured rounds, he's been an absolute maestro across the board, but mostly with the putter, where he's getting over half a stroke per round. So gotta like to see that with a Taylor Moore. I also like Seamus Power, Adam Hadman. I do have to say that these guys in this 8K range, particularly the ones that are like -1 or even +1, like a Grillo or Hadman, are going to be particularly low owned. People want to give up on these players after one bad round. I mean, there's a legitimate argument to be made that guys like a Grillo, guys like a Hadman, Justin Sepp Straka, for example, are pretty much the same players as the guys down here in the 7K range, like a Svensson, for example, maybe like a Chris Kirk, some of the better players in the 7K range. I mean, Gary Woodland would be a great example of that, but they're going to get plenty of ownership down here, right? Their perceived values, a lot of people are going to get to them. These guys up here that are maybe a little bit overpriced, particularly after their lackluster first round performance, are going to be especially low owned for this range. So, you got to spend all your salary at some point. If you're going to try and find a pivot and spend all of your salary, these are the sort of guys that you're going to get to, right? Because, if you choose not to take these guys and just take some of the other chalky pieces up here, it's going to force you down to taking some of these chalky guys in this range, right? And unless you decide to take pivots here, rather than the pivots in the 8K range, you're going to be dealing with a really chalky lineup. And the real issue I have here is that the pivots at the top of the 7K range aren't all that strong, right? The guys that are going to be low owned here are low owned for a reason, right? Most of them either had a really bad round one and you're hoping that they turn it around, or just aren't all that good of players to begin with. So this top of the 8K range, it can be a little bit ugly. You don't feel all that great when you're clicking them in. But if you're looking for that ownership leverage, trying to play the game theory game, I think it makes a little bit of sense to focus, especially to maybe take 4 or 5 guys from this 8K range and take them 30-35% plus in your player pool, because you're going to need to have that mid-K range filled out, particularly if you're playing 150 lineups. but it's also a really good way to differentiate yourself. And guys like Taylor Moore, right, who we talked about, fit that role perfectly. Bottom of the 8K range, Justin Suh was dog shit round one. Now, if you want to get a pure game theory play here, play Justin Suh, but he didn't look very good at the Fortnite either. I may give him a few lineups, a little bit of exposure there in Justin Suh, just to say that it did so in case he goes out there and has a really good round. But he is a high pedigree player, I do have to say. Everything that I've heard about him is that he's going to be a stud going forward. So I don't think I should just discount him going forward. But yeah, he's looked pretty rough here over the first 3 rounds that we've seen him here on tour. Trey Mullinax started off beautifully. He was -2 through his first 3 holes. Double bogeyed, made a couple bogeys, and ended up +3 on the day, which is pretty rough if you ask me. He's going to be low owned, though. People will jump ship rather quickly on somebody like a Trey Mullinax. So if you're looking for leverage, you can play him or Harris English, who also shot +3 today. At the top of the 7K range, you'd really be surprised. I mean, if Mullinax was $7,800, he'd probably be twice as owned as what he is at $8,200. Harris English, if he was $7,700, he'd probably be 2-3 times as owned. So if you're looking for leverage, right, take these guys like a Mullinax, English, and Clark, because of this price tag right here, and Suh especially, right, they're going to be a lot lower owned than these guys, just like $300, $400 less expensive. And you could argue that a lot of them are pretty much the same player, right? Like, just to give you an idea, like Lauer is probably the worst player of the bunch of all of these guys. And he's going to be one of the higher owned players just because of his round 1 performance. Mark Hubbard is going to be like 7 to 10% owned, most likely. And that's a good double, sometimes 3 times as owned as some of the other players up here. You got to keep the price in mind too, right? And look at some of the ownership numbers here. There are a few guys here I like a Chris Kirk. I mean, I do think that he will be relatively low owned, right? I have him at 7.1%. That's lower owned than Justin Lauer. It's way lower owned than somebody like a Mark Hubbard, for example. So he's a pivot that I can see myself getting to. Going off in the morning, which isn't ideal. He's not the longest player off the tee, so that is a slight issue for Chris Kirk, but he loves himself Bermuda grass. I think he's just a better player than some of his peers. I mean, in terms of a comp, I mean, he's almost as good a player as somebody like a Seamus Power, who I think Seamus Power is already underpriced, should probably be a 9K golfer. I mean, I'm not saying that I think Chris Kirk is a 9K golfer in this stretch of form that he's in, but I mean, early in the Florida swing, right, we had like $9,800 Chris Kirk, if you remember that, at a field that was even stronger than what we're seeing this week. So I don't think it's all that far-fetched to say that he's at least an 8K golfer, if not somebody that's a 9K golfer when he's playing his best golf. A few other pivots that you could get to. I mean, Aaron Rye, I like quite a bit. Alex Smalley shot -1, so it wasn't a horrible round by any means, but it wasn't a sexy, flashy one. So I don't think he's going to be super chalky. I definitely like running back there. Svensson, I do like too. He will be a little bit chalky because of his round, but he ended with a lot of solid momentum, made 4 birdies on his last 9 holes, and just in general, a player with an upwards trajectory. And his rookie year, he had plenty of those top 25 finishes. I think here in 2022, 2023, you're going to see him post more of those top 5, top 10s. So I think you see him take that step forward. And at a weak field event like this, it would be a perfect venue for him to go out there and do so. But Brendan Steele is the next featured pick I want to talk about here. He's $7,400. Another morning wave player that, again, I'm not really taking one wave or the other, right? If I've mentioned one wave being advantageous, I think it's going to be the PM wave, but I think it's going to be like a 0.1, 0.2 shot difference. So again, it's not the end all be all, but what I really like here is that he had a poor round this afternoon, right? 7.6% owned. He could not make a putt for his life. The ball striking was there all day though. And if he could just go out there and even just be a neutral putter, I mean, he's going to shoot something like 3 or 4 under par. The tee to green play was excellent today. He was top 25, I believe, in both the approach play and off the tee metrics. In terms of around the green play and putting, I mean, that's always what Brendan Steele is going to struggle with, right? So if we take a look at the numbers, you'll see that over his last 24 rounds, he's losing nearly a stroke with the flat stick. So you'd expect that to happen, but he's not normally that bad on Bermuda grass. So hopefully he can turn that around sooner rather than later. I keep forgetting about this whiskey over here. I got to celebrate this win a little bit, right? Heck, I got a hole burning in my pocket over here with this $2,200 over there, and it looks like, just based on what I'm seeing from Discord over there, Mars Sharks almost won a GPP2. He entered the same lineup as I did, Buckethead. also went out there and was able to do pretty good on his lineup. So you love to see it. The Anton says Sam Burns under 70 and Riley under 70.5 look decent on prize picks, question mark. So I think Sam Burns under 70 is something that I'd consider. The Davis Riley under 70.5, I'm not nearly as bullish on. So we're going to talk about prize picks at the end of this. I really like fading almost the entire board. So we're going to talk about the reasons why, Anson. I have a little bit of research that I've done about the entire field over round one that I think you want to hear about before you enter any cards tonight, because there's averages from round one that are pretty glaring, pretty eye-opening when it comes to some of the stats, some of the props here for round two. I would have a really hard time taking supportive stances. Let's just say that. So I don't want to give away all of the analysis now, but yeah, later on we'll talk through some of the prize pick stuff. And let's just say it's going to be a tough sledding tomorrow to hit overs for birdies, to hit unders for strokes, overs for greens or overs for fairways. It's going to be tough sledding. So I would be a little bit careful about that, Anson, but we'll talk about that in full detail here a little bit later. Let's go into the middle of the 7K range now. So Luke List had the round of his life today. I played him in my DFS lineup, so that's great, but it's not going to continue. I mean, the guy made so many 10-footers today. I mean, it was outrageous. He didn't miss a putt from within 5 feet. That is not going to last. Luke List literally lost 8 strokes putting in round one, his last start. If he can lose 8 strokes putting in a round, he can lose 2, 3 in a round like it's nothing, right? I mean, we've seen that for his entire career. He's not going to go out there and have that performance. And again, I mean, if he does, and he ends up getting into the top 10 of this tournament for my DFS lineups, I guess I have to be okay with that. But for showdown purposes, I think you'd be beside yourself to go out there and expect that to happen again. I mean, he's the worst putter on literally all of the PGA Tour. That's not just me saying it. That's literally the stats perspective there. I mean, him and Brendan Steele give each other a run for their money in that department. But Luke List is consistently even worse than a Brendan Steele, and he's also going to be like twice his own. So, you know, when they're at the same price tag, one of them shot -3 today, one of them shot even. I'm going to take the lower owned one all day. I don't really care how they played in round one. That's not going to really take me off of one guy or the other. Moving on a little bit further, Davis Thompson at $7,400. I do have to say that he had a lackluster day today, and a lot of people were on him going into the week. He was nearly 10% owned in a lot of the GPPs out there. And after today's performance, a lot of those people are going to say, screw it, right? Screw Davis Thompson. He's horrible, blah, 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 blah. Even though the scoring average was an even par 72 today, which is what Davis Thompson shot. I mean, you're going to have rough days out there, right? He was a well above average Korn Ferry Tour player, was able to win out there on the Korn Ferry Tour, which a lot of these Korn Ferry Tour graduates aren't able to say. I just expect him to be a high upside player. If people are going to jump off ship after one bad round, that's going to be my invitation to jump on board. So definitely like him at 7,400. Zecheng Dao, which by the way, his name's Marty Dao. So I don't know why all of the projection systems, Draftkings, you know, this is where I get all the names from on here. Draftkings has him as Zecheng Dao rather than Marty Dao, but his name is Marty Dao. So I'm going to call him Marty from now on. I think most people out there should probably call him Marty too. But a stud, he's been out here for quite a while. It's not his actual rookie year. He did earn his tour card this year, but he's been on the PGA Tour before. He's an okay play. I don't love him for tomorrow, but it makes sense. He's priced appropriately. I don't think he's too cheap. I don't think he's too expensive. Patrick Rogers, though, is always somebody I consider taking in showdown formats because he's an absolute madman. This guy does not have to go out there and gain 2-3 strokes of the approach play to get to his ceiling performance. He can do it entirely with the putter. I mean, we've seen this guy, you know, on the flip side of a Luke List, go out there and gain 8 strokes putting in a certain event. So $7,300, I definitely like his chances to go out there and have some success. But the real key here is he's going to be low owned, right? Like I'm not investing 20, 25% of my lineups into him, much closer to like 15, maybe 18 to 20% if I'm feeling a little bit frisky about it. I'm in hopes that he gets to that ceiling performance because more often than not, he's going to have a round like he had there in round one, right? Which isn't that impressive. But he definitely has a lot more upside to get to that -5, -6 sort of performance compared to a lot of the other players around him in pricing. Next up, we've got Nick Hardy at $7,200. Now, Nick Hardy, an AM Wave golfer, which, you know, again, I don't really care about the whole wave thing all that much. But if any of these guys are going to succeed in the morning wave, it's the players that are relatively long off the tee, right? Steele, he's not a bomber, but he's definitely well above average in terms of his distance. Same thing with Nick Hardy. I mean, we talked about Chris Kirk maybe being the one guy I'm worried about. But, Sam Burns, Russell Henley, pretty solid off the tee players, right? They're going to be able to handle that off the tee distance. Same thing with Nick Hardy here. Nick Hardy had a pretty decent round one, but I still only have him projected to be owned in 3.9% of lineups. The reason for that is for 4-round contest, he was super low owned. And at this point is pretty much the same price as what he was for 4-round contests. So even with some of the hype behind him now, I'm not sure it's going to influence his ownership all that much. So for me, Nick Hardy, I think he's a decent play here, high birdie percentage player going off in the morning. I'll at least have him in like 10, maybe 15% of my lineups. In terms of the bottom of the 7K range, Kazire's an extremely volatile play that you might want to consider. Hayden Buckley started off pretty well today. He's also, I would say, has like a knack for this golf course, right? He played really well here last year. I believe finished in 4th place. Callum Tran was a core pick for me. I'm going to be getting back there as well. He had a bunch of birdies, but also was a little bit sloppy when it came to the bogey production. So if he can clean that up, continue to post the putts like he has to this point, could go out there and get to a ceiling. Malnati, kind of similar to somebody like a Hayden Buckley, has had past success here. In fact, Malnati finished in 2nd place to Sebastian Munoz. So $7,000, likes the golf course, is low owned at 2.8%. And Malnati, I'll play him at any golf course. It doesn't have to be one that he has a lot of experience at. In a showdown format where you're looking for birdie production, there's almost no better player in the field than Peter Malnati. He's an absolute stud. He's a madman, might even be a better word for it, because he does not care, right? He's extremely confident. He'll go for every single flag stick, does not hold back whatsoever when it comes to his aggression. And you got to love that at $7,000. Moving on a little bit further, Smotherman at $6,900. I always love myself some Smother Me in money, so I could see myself getting there. MD Daffy, the man had an ace today. By the way, him and Brandon Wu, 2 players in my player pool that I talked up throughout the week and talked about on live stream yesterday, on Wednesday, right? Ended up making hole-in-one today. Pretty sick. I had at least 15% of both players, which is going pretty well so far. Sam Ryder, another player I played going into the week that I could see myself getting to here for round 2 showdown. He's got himself an aggressive mindset. So kind of similar to a Peter Malnati. If you're looking for an aggressive player, might be worth a few looks. Boy, do I hate Brian Stewart. The man shot -3 today as well. The man just tries to piss me off anytime I see him. That's all I got to say about good old Brian Stewart. I love giving him shit, that's for sure. Let's see. Let's continue with this, though. Now we're into the actual 6K range. And 2 golfers that I want to touch on here. Let's go with Ryan Armour to start. So Ryan Armour is $6,800. High birdie percentage player. 3 or 4 events ago, he ended up finishing in like 30th place and had the most birdies of any player in the field. So even when Ryan Armour is playing poor golf, he's capable of going out there and making 4 or 5 birdies a round. So you got to like that at his price tag. He doesn't have to shoot like 5 or 6 under par to get to the optimal. Could shoot something like 2 or 3 under par, make 4 or 5 birdies and get to that performance. He's 1.2% owned. Kind of similar to a Peter Malnati. He's not the longest player off the tee, but he does hit a lot of fairways. Is a little bit of a Bermuda putting specialist. So I like all of those things. He's a high birdie percentage player. I can definitely get there in those formats. Harrison Endicott was a little bit of a sweetheart going into the week. All of the DFS hardos seemed like I got to play myself some Harrison Endicott this week, right? He's number 1 in my model, right? Look at total model ranking. He's number 1. Oh, wonder why, right? Because he has a small sample size, right? So it's because he had a really good round last week where he went out there, shot like 8 under par there on Sunday. So all the models that you're looking at are going to love Harrison Endicott because of the recent form. The reason I want to get to him is no one's going to play him tomorrow, right? He shot 1 over par today. He's 2.5% owned. Clearly has a penchant for going low. I mean, we saw that with Showdown at the Fortinet Championship, and he's a decent ball striker. Like, we saw enough of that round when he got low to know that he can hit some darts. From what I can tell from the Korn Ferry Tour stats, he seems like a solid approach player. Was one of the highest greens of regulation percentage players in all of the Korn Ferry Tour. Also a little bit of a spike player. A lot of his good performances were like top 5, top 10s. Had plenty of missed cuts mixed in on the Korn Ferry Tour as well. Those sort of profiles of players that are like hit or miss, right? It's either trunk slam or finish in the top 5, top 10 are the exact sort of players that we're looking to get to in a showdown sort of format. So definitely like getting to some Harrison Endicott. In this range down here, Chad Ramey, I think he's just better than some of the other guys around him. He had a horrible round today, but I think he's in a good bounce back spot. Also played well at Corrales, my number one comp course for this week. Scott Piercy, I'm getting to because he is long off the tee. So even though he's playing in the morning, he should be able to overcome that. He had a few good performances towards the end of last season, so he can definitely build off of that. We've seen him get into hot stretches of golf, right? First round leader a few times. Over those 2 to 3 event stretch where he was really playing well, the approach play was through the roof. So we know he's a high upside player, just 1.4% owned at $6,500. Definitely somebody that I'm taking a shot on there. In this range here, Brandon Matthews is going to be chalk, so you probably want to avoid him. He is a high upside player, but I'm going to get some attention because of that -5 performance. At the bottom of the 6K range, it's really tough to take players down here. But one guy I do see myself getting to is going to be Garrett Kegel and even $6,000. He shot a pretty decent round today. I'll remind you, Garrett Kegel won the Palmetto Championship, so he is a PGA Tour winner, in a recent one at that people seem to forget about. And overseas has won 7 times, and the kid's like 22 years old. Looking at a young up-and-coming prospect. After the win last year, completely fell off of the human earth. I mean, off the planet Earth at that point. Did not look like anything like his former self. May have been a little bit too celebratory after that win. Might have gone a little bit unfocused. But I expect him to figure it out at some point. He's an extremely talented kid. I actually talked him up going into the week as a potential pick. And after the -2 performance in round 1, he's still $6,000. I think I have to buy in, right? Because he is a momentum player. If he's truly a little bit more focused, maybe getting back into a groove like we saw back there towards the beginning of last season, he is unbelievably mispriced. I mean, when he won at the Palmetto, he was a $9,000 golfer when he came over from the European Tour. And that was his first ever real start on the PGA Tour. He was a $9,000 golfer and won, right? So remember that. It was $9,000 and won. Now he's $6,000, right? And he had a pretty decent round in round 1. He's 1.5% owned. That's just somebody that I have to play. I know that he's bringing a lot of volatility to the table, but if he hits at 1.5% owned, I have the nuts at a $6,000 price tag, right? That's just something that I have to put in my player pool. Let's go over to Draftkings now. What we're going to do is talk through a little bit of the GPP building strategy, and then afterwards talk through our top prize picks props, and we'll wrap it up after that. But what we'll do in terms of the strategy is we're going to hand build a few lineups. So we're going to talk through a large field GPP lineup, a cash build, and give you an idea of kind of what's going through my head when I'm clicking in some of these players here. So in the large field GPP, we do have to worry about ownership. So to give you an idea of how to navigate the chocolates, typically how I like to do these, by the way, if you've noticed, if you want to be unique, right? Start down here in the 9K range. Like I mentioned, a few guys in the middle of the 9K range that are going to be especially low owned. That's not entertaining, right? You take low owned players, you're not going to have trouble being unique, right? You just enter a combination of 6 low owned players. That's a really easy way to make a lineup. I could tell you that in about 5 seconds. What's harder, right, is navigating the chalk, right? What do I do if I really like Sam Burns, who's going to be super high owned? How do I make sure that I differentiate myself given that I have that piece of chalk? And here's how you do so. So Sam Burns at $10,500. Your second man in, you need to save some salary, right? You're already down to $7,900, but you need this to be a pivot. You can't be taking a Davis Riley. You can't be taking a Scott Stallings, somebody that's going to give you a product ownership of something like 6-7% after just 2 players, which is not what you want, right? You don't want a 4-on-4 versus 7% of the field, particularly in some of the large field GPPs. When we get down to this top of the 8K range, I mean, a Grio, a Hadman, right? All of these sort of players are going to be a lot lower owned, and they also give us a little bit of that salary flexibility. So just for the sake of this, let's click in an Adam Hadman here towards the bottom of the 8K range. Maybe we'll be a little bit more chalky about it. We could also spend a little bit more salary here. I'm going to put in a Taylor Moore too. That puts us at $7,400. We took a Sam Burns. We have 2 guys that are going to be 10% owned or less in a Adam Hadman and a Taylor Moore. And now I feel a little bit better about our build. Now we can't be over chalky at this point, right? We can't go overboard, but we can start to take guys here that are a little bit higher up, right? Like Chris Kirk. He's still going to get some attention, but I still like him here for the next round. Here in the middle of the 7K range, we can take a Svensson. So a Kirk and Svensson, they're both going to be like 7 to 8% owned. So they're still getting some attention, but because we took 10% or owned less players before, our product ownership is just going down and going down and going down, right? From 6 or 7%. Now you're going down to like right around like 0.7%, right? And then you're going down to like 0.1 or 0.2%, so on and so forth. One more low owned player now, right? And we're down here at $6,900, and you're looking at like a product ownership of like 0.1, 0.2, something like that, which is usually what you're looking for in a large field GPP. So, pretty much pick your run of the litter here. I like Sam Ryder. I do like Austin Smotherman. Heck, even guys like a Ryan Armour down there who we talked up. My good old boy, Harrison Endicott at $6,900. All of those would be adequate endings to that sort of GPP kind of lineup. A little pasty here late at night. Not used to doing these late night streams, so my bad, boys. Let's go ahead and talk through the single entry lineup now. So actually, single entry, you can build that same sort of lineup, right? But maybe instead of going to a super low owned guy down low, you'd be a little bit more chalky, right? So just to give you an idea, instead of taking somebody like a Chris Kirk, maybe you want to take Mark Hubbard, right? Maybe you really like Mark Hubbard. Maybe you want to go up here rather than taking an Adam Hadman, go up and take somebody like a Thomas Dietrich or even a Davis Riley in that sort of lineup. You could probably take one more piece of chalk in that sort of build in a single entry and get away with it. So a GPP to a single entry, it's a similar sort of style, just can maybe be a little bit more lax with the ownership thing when it comes to the smaller field contests. But what we'll do now is go through a cash build. And in cash, there's really a simple way to build here. You take Sam Burns in cash, that's for damn sure. You also take Davis Riley in cash, that's for damn sure in terms of their price tag. But then you live in this 7K range because like I mentioned, these guys are the top of the 8K, and then here at the top of the 7K, they're pretty much the same players, right? And Aaron Rye is the cash game legend. You have to take him in almost any cash game that you're playing. Chris Kirk is a similar sort of consistent high floor player. Those are the sort of guys I'm looking to take in a cash build. I'm also, relatively cheap here at the top of the 7K range. In terms of our next man in, Davis Thompson, right? Davis Thompson's going to project off the board. He's just a better player than his peers. And you can finish this up with any combination of an S.H. Kim. You'd use Adam Svensson there. If you wanted to leave $100 on the table, I'd be okay with taking Will Gordon too, right? Who shot -6 today. You want to take a lot of chalky players when it comes to your cash build, and not just chalky players that also have a relatively high floor. And based on all of these players, they're all good ball strikers. A bunch of chalk at the top that are playing well to this point. Aaron Rye, Chris Kirk, Davis Thompson just hit the ball on an absolute string. So if you just sort by shots gained to ball striking, it's a really good way to find some of these cash plays, particularly when you adjust for price and try and do that sort of thing. So that's what we're looking at in cash. Now let's look at this prize picks board. So we're going to take some time here, go category by category, talk through some of the props that I'm thinking on. So if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and comment them down below, and we'll see what's going on. My brother's down there. What's going on, Forbes? Hopefully you're doing well. He said, good evening. Such a formal introduction there, Forbes. What's going on? Hopefully you're doing well. Over here for the prize picks board, though, 4 birdies or better. This is overpriced. So I promised you a little bit of research earlier in the stream. The average birdie mark today was 3.21 birdies. 3.21. And the lowest number that you're going to find on here is 3.5. It's guys like a Ches Reavie, Luke List, for example. Sepp Straka there at 3.5. Plenty of guys at 4, 4.5 for Sam Burns at Davis Riley. This is a fade board if I've ever seen one. Even for Sam Burns and Davis Riley, I have a hard time arguing to take the over there. Plenty of guys at 4. I think you could argue taking the under on. So just to give you an idea of a few, Adam Hadman teeing off in the PM wave. He's at 4 birdies or better. I consider taking the under on him. Moving down towards the bottom, the guy's at 3.5. Maybe don't take the under on him, right? It's a 3.2 average. It's not like there's a massive difference between the average and then what these guys are at. But the guys at 4, particularly those that are not in form, didn't play so well there for round 1, are prime candidates for a fade. And even Davis Riley at 4.5 birdies, I know he played well here in round 1. It's a tough prospect to do 2 more birdies, right? To go 67% higher than the field average, to go out there and make 5 birdies, is asking a lot. Even from an elite level player like Riley, he looked good there in round 1. Heading over to the strokes board now. So for strokes, the average today was 70.03 strokes. Sorry, 72.03 strokes. So 0.03 strokes over par. So you're seeing an over par average, and you can see here the highest number on the board is 72 strokes, which again is slightly under the average for what you saw today. So you're going to see a lot of overs here. I mean, particularly for the guys at the bottom here, like Sam Burns, he's probably the one guy to take an under on the entire board. Because, he shot -2 today. He's won at this golf course. He also finished in the top 5 3 years ago when he played at the Sanderson Farms Championship. So he'd be the one supportive stance that I consider taking by fading Davis Riley here. A lot of the guys at 71, I mean, JT Poston would be a prime fade candidate. Chris Kirk. You consider fading guys like Adam Hadman here for strokes, not just for birdies. Stuart Sink. I mean, just Luke List here at 71 strokes too. All of those sort of players are at best slightly better than average players. And even if we expect conditions to be a little bit easier, what we saw for Thursday, and based on the weather report, I don't think we can really say that. I think it's going to be pretty much identical. You're looking at like a 71.8, 71.7 average. These sort of players that are pretty much average players for the field, what we're projecting them for like 71.5 strokes at the very best. Again, those are all best case scenario sort of things. Why wouldn't we just slam the over for, I don't want to say the entire strokes board, but almost all of it, right? Just like for over here for birdies, you could argue to take the under for almost every single prop on the board too. So it's set up to be a fade board if I've ever seen one before. And through birdies are better or strokes, the only props I'd consider taking in terms of a supportive stance would be the Sam Burns strokes. And then over here with birdie or better, I considered taking the over. It was on Chris Kirk, who's at 3.5 birdies I considered. And it was 3.5 birdies on, I think that's it. Sorry, it was the 3.5 over on Chris Kirk and then the under on Sam Burns. I didn't end up playing them in a card because I wasn't that bullish on them, but if I was going to take an over, it would probably be those two. For birdies or better matchup, I mean, there's not much to talk about here, so we're not going to go through the props. If you want to see what birdie or better matchups I'm on for tomorrow, go ahead and check out my Patreon page. There is a link down in the description of the video. That's how you get access to all of my projections. Also, all of the props that I'm taking. And if you're looking for all the strokes props that I have in my cards, that's where you can find them, all the birdie or better props, especially for birdie or better matchups, right? I mean, there's not much to say here, right? I can't really break them down without giving you the pick. So go ahead and check those out on the Patreon. Let's go over here to greens regulation. The average today was 11 greens. It was a 61% average, which is right around 11 greens regulation. And the lowest number we have on the board here is 12.5 greens regulation. This is yet again another fade board. And the guys I'm focusing on are the guys at 13 greens that aren't the best iron players. So Adam Hadman, once again, right, kind of picking on him at this point. Gary Woodland, Ches Reavie, for example. Even some of the guys at 12.5 greens, I consider taking fades on, like a JT Poston, for example, Stuart Sink, Sepp Straka. All these sort of players, if the average is going to be 11 greens of regulation, I'm rejecting at most for like 11.5, 11.6 greens, which is almost a whole green regulation less than what they have in terms of the average on there. And I will say that in terms of the actual scoring conditions, it might be easier to play in the afternoon wave than the morning wave. But the afternoon wave, it will be harder to hit greens regulation because of how hard the greens are going to be, right? They're going to firm up throughout the day as some of that dampness, some of the humidity evaporates throughout the day. So that's something to consider for the greens of regulation props, right? Maybe not for the scoring average, which I think might be easier in the afternoon, but definitely in terms of actually hitting greens. Alrighty, let's go on to the final category here, which is going to be fairways hit. And in terms of fairways hit today, let me check my notes here just to make sure I'm giving you the exact number, the right one here. Let's see. The average fairways hit today was 6.7 fairways hit. So the highest number here, actually the lowest number, is a better way to put this, is 7 fairways hit. The highest number is 9 fairways hit. That's telling us that this is a clear fade board, and it's pretty much the same as we've been talking about. The below average accuracy players like a Luke List, Stuart Sink, Davis Riley, Adam Hadwin, a few of the other guys here at 8 fairways are going to be guys that you have to consider fading. They're just below average players. The average is 6.7 fairways hit. Even if we expect conditions to be a little bit easier for Friday than what we saw for Thursday, you're going to have an average rate around like 6.8, 6.9 fairways hit per round. And these aren't elite level accuracy players. In fact, outside of Ches Reavie, most of the players on this list, and I'd probably include Russell Henley in that list too, are below average accuracy players. I mean, particularly the guys at 7.5. I mean, Davis Riley is one of the lowest accuracy players on tour. Same thing with JT Poston. Gary Woodland can't hit a fairway for his life. Same thing with Luke List. They're just clear fades. So for me, it's a bunch of unders on fairways as well. Let's go ahead and catch up on chat, see what's going on down there. We do have Matt who says, what are your 2 best picks for the next round? Honestly, man, you're going to have to ask that on the Patreon. I'm not going to give a top 2 picks unless somebody's paying for it. So yeah, you're going to have to check it out on Patreon. Todd says, what's the weather look like in the AM? So yeah, we'll hop over here. So I talked about it at the beginning of the stream. Obviously, this has been going on for an hour. So I understand if you're just hopping in here now. It's looking slightly less windy than the afternoon. So in the afternoon, you will have slightly harder to hit greens because it'll be a little bit firmer and faster. Also, the wind conditions are a little bit worse, but it's a little bit more nuanced than that. Here on Thursday, we had a lot harder conditions in the morning than in the afternoon, which you probably wouldn't have expected looking at the wind forecast. That was due to the temperature, right? So it was only 55 degrees in the morning today, went up to 70 in the afternoon. It's not going to be as drastic for Friday. You can see it's starting at 60 degrees rather than 55 degrees, going up to 75 degrees. But you should still expect a similar sort of effect, right? So the morning wave will have better wind conditions, but you're also dealing with that little bit of cold air, right? The ball not traveling as far in the morning. So I think it's going to play relatively flat. But when we're talking about like greens and regulation, it's important to mention because they are going to be harder to hit in the afternoon. And you could argue the same thing for fairways and regulation. The guys that are playing in the afternoon are going to be dealing with the wind, which will at least make it a little bit more tricky to hit fairways. But more importantly, because they're firmer and faster in the afternoon, the fairways will also be a little bit harder to hit. So that's the weather report. It's relatively flat, but for some of the stat categories on Prize Picks, tends to be a little bit of a bigger deal. So definitely wanted to talk about that. And that's all we've got. So yeah, boys, that's all we're going to touch on here for the live stream. It's a lot later than usual. Normally, I'm asleep by this point, right? But hey, we won that GPP for the NFL, or at least almost did. Sorry, didn't win. We came in 3rd place. But I won 22x my money, so it feels like I won the GPP. Did pretty good over there. But that will be decent. We'll be doing these same sort of live streams going forward, but not this late at night. Tomorrow night, we'll be doing one at right around like 8 p.m. Eastern time. So we won't have like a Thursday night football game to worry about. So if you're looking for Saturday picks, we're doing that tomorrow night. It'll be for Prize Picks and for Draftkings. And also for round 4 Showdown, we'll be going live on Saturday night covering that. So looking forward to it, guys. Best of luck with all of your picks here. And hopefully we can take down a GPP on the golf side, right? Carry some of that momentum that we just picked up over from the NFL and maybe ship a few more contests. But until then, boys, best of luck with all of your lineups and let's get this cash.